Before we get started, I have an exciting announcement. We are launching a line of Head South pleasure provisions, products designed to decrease friction and enhance connection. Discover a new level of intimacy and connection with Head South's upcoming range of premium sexual wellness products, including 2 intimacy serums and a luxurious massage oil. Join our waitlist today and enjoy an exclusive 15% off on your first order. You can find the link in our show notes and head over to headsouth.world. And now let's start the episode.
Management there.
You're listening to Head South Radio with your host, Cat Meyer, a podcast dedicated to prioritizing pleasure and removing the stigma and shame around sex. We're here to be curious and have an open conversation about sexual health and relational wellness. This podcast is intended for educational and entertainment purposes. The information discussed is not a substitute for professional medical advice.
So my name is Gina Schiappacasse. I know Cat from our days working together at a company called Hairstory, which was a pretty cool hair products brand in the early days of clean beauty, founded by the Bumble and Bumble founder, Michael Gordon. And we had a fantastic team of really creative, wonderful, talented human beings. And it was definitely like a dream job experience. And Cat was a dream manager. So we've stayed friends ever since.
And thank you so much. I'm so glad to ask you to be on. You've interviewed me before for the podcast. You helped me get through the about the founder or about the host portion, which is something that is a little difficult for me. I have trouble sometimes speaking about myself. So I've asked you back on to kind of interview me for the next stage of Head South. And so before we get started, I wanted to ask a few icebreakers for both of us to kind of answer and warm up. So these I've been asking to some of the guests more recently. So would you rather be tied up or tie someone up?
Oh, definitely tied up.
Mm-hmm. I'd rather both, but I do like being tied up. Marry, fuck, kill, pizza, sushi, or chocolate?
That's a tough one. I mean, those are all so delicious. How do you choose?
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Marry, sushi, kill pizza, fuck chocolate.
Okay. Marry, fuck, kill, Seth Rogen, Jason Segel, and Paul Rudd.
I'm the worst person to ask this question because celebrities, I'm like, who is that?
I know.
I know 2 of the 3, so that's not super helpful.
Who are the 2 that you know?
I know Paul Rudd and who's the first one? See, exactly, Seth Rogen.
Seth Rogen. Well, funny enough, Jason Segel is often confused for Seth Rogen.
There you go.
Jason Segel they both were actually in Freaks and Geeks.
Oh,
but Jason
yes.
Segel was in Forgetting Sarah Marshall. I think that's his biggest.
Yep.
Or he was in that he was in the Paul Rudd movie about them being friends, male friendships. I don't know if you remember that. It was a romantic bro comedy.
No, I've never saw that one.
A romantic comedy about,
Is that a genre, bromantic comedy?
I don't know. That might be just that specific movie. It was actually a good movie, but Paul Rudd has no friends as a man, and his girlfriend has a book club and all these friends, so she's trying to get him. And it's Rashida Jones is his fiance. And so he doesn't have a best man, essentially, and they're getting married. And he's like, I don't have any male, I don't have friends. And then he meets Jason Segel's character, and they start kind of hanging out and develop a bromance with each other. And it's cute.
That's cute.
Yeah, so it's a romantic movie. But so those are the only ways I can reference.
No, that adds
Jason
up.
Segel. Yeah, but he is often, I think Jason Segel and Seth Rogen are often confused for one another, or people morph them into the same person.
Yeah. There's a lot of Hollywood overlaps like that.
Yeah.
Where you're I get that those 2 actors confused all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So yeah, if you were to marry, fuck, kill, I'm assuming you're going to kill Jason Segel because you're I don't know this guy.
No, I remember him from Freaks and Geeks. So I'm okay, now I get it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to go with kill Seth Rogen, fuck Paul Rudd, and marry Jason Segel.
Yeah, that's a good lineup. Yeah, I would go with the same. And then one last one. I'm very excited about this one. Marry, fuck, kill, brie, halloumi, or Parmesan cheese, and Parmesan cheese.
Oh, shoot. Yeah. Oh, this is so hard. I love all cheese pretty equally, so I don't know if I can decide on this. Marry halloumi, fuck brie, kill Parmesan.
Okay. I would actually kill brie. I would fuck halloumi and marry Parmesan.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, it's a good choice.
Or I would have a domestic partnership with Parmesan. One last one, actually, and I'm excited for this one too because it has to do with cheese. Would you rather give up cheese for life or give up masturbation for life?
Oh, that's so unfair. I'm going to have to go with cheese. There are other things, giving up cheese. There are other things that you can derive pleasure from.
Yeah.
It's not the same though.
Yeah. Vegans survive. Like you can have cashew cheese and
alternative
cheese product. But yeah.
I'm assuming that means I don't have to give up other dairy. So I think that's okay.
Right. No, it's specifically just cheese.
Okay.
Yeah. Alrighty. So yeah, that's our little warm up icebreaker. If you want to get started with your questions.
So, Kat, you're just on the cusp of launching a new sexual wellness brand, Head South. Congratulations.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah. I know this has been a long time coming. Can you tell us a bit about the brand?
Yeah. I mean, I can start with where the idea came from. You mentioned how we met, which was hair care. That's predominantly what I've worked in for the past decade, is in hair care, doing hair, working in production, working with Michael on a lot of different projects and consulting. And at one point, a few years ago, Michael and I had been developing a product line, our own product line as co-founders. And we were raising funds, and we happened to be in England at the time. This was in 2021. And during that time, Michael's previous company that we had worked for, there was a sale. And so it put him into a non-compete. And so what we had been working on had to go on the shelf, unfortunately. And then it kind of made me pivot. But for a while, for many, many years, actually, I'd been considering going back to school to study sex therapy. I mean, I've talked to you about your mom, and she's a therapist, and our other friends who have parents who are therapists. And I have a good friend whose mom became a therapist later in life. So that was kind of always in my mind of like, at some point, I want to study sex therapy or sex education, because that was something I wanted to do when I was 17. And so then as Michael and I were developing this hair care brand, that idea started coming up for me and being like, oh, okay, maybe in like the next 10 years. And then this whole thing happened. And I also love the idea of like the universe intervening. And so it put that hair care project on the shelf. But then the concept to me, it was something I was very passionate about. And I woke up one morning when Michael and I were going to be speaking to lawyers about what we could do. And that morning I woke up from a dream about lubes. It just was like, it just popped in my head. I was like in the middle of like coming out of the dream and waking up and being like, oh, lubes. And I recognized like, oh, instead of going back to school and going through a whole process of becoming a sex therapist, like why, and do that, like completely pivot and turn away from like everything I've just been doing for the past decade. I still wanted to work and create a product and work with what I've known and studied, and working so closely with Michael and understanding how to build a brand and how to storytell was very strongly ingrained in me. So it was like, I don't want to just completely turn away from what I know. And so it was kind of bringing the idea and the passion for sex education to what I've already been working on and the passions I have in creating products, and not just any products, but creating products that are, I think you would agree that, you know, working for Hairstory, working with Michael, there is this belief of like creating something that's going to make change versus like just repeating and making something that's already on the shelf. If there's no innovation, if there's nothing that's creating a change in people's habits or a change in the way that they think about things, or something that creates an impact or improves someone's life, then there's no point in creating more. We already have so much in the world, on the planet. And so that was something very much important to me, in doing something to create a product line that would change how we engage and talk about sex and intimacy, creating products that change how we interact with the packaging So sustainability as well as reducing friction physically as well as mentally and emotionally.
Yeah, very intentional. But I think that was something we learned from Michael is, yeah, there's just no point in like filling a hole in the market for the sake of filling a hole if you're not making something better or
Yes.
contributing something that people will really fall in love with.
Mm-hmm.
And, those big companies tend to be, tend to say like, oh, we see a trend here, we'll make something to fit. But I think really like thinking consciously about what you're contributing is a pretty incredible angle as a founder.
Yeah, I love that word. Intentional is kind of how I want to live my life in all aspects, including in what I'm producing or creating in the world or putting out in the world. And so being very intentional about what these products are and why they exist and who they're for, and not just saying like, oh, this is a trend. And we can speak to this in hair care. And I remember this very clearly sitting at a table and talking about Elnet hairspray and the fact that like it's the best. It exists for a reason. And Michael was like, we don't need to make a dupe of Elnet. We don't have to do that.
Exactly.
That's kind of how I approached developing these products and working with my lab and what we wanted to do and how we wanted to frame intimacy serums and a massage oil.
Did you know much about the market going in?
I didn't know. Nope, not at all. So after that conversation with the lawyers, so I had the dream about lubes. Michael and I spoke to the lawyers, and I had a call immediately after scheduled with my friend Ian, who had been kind of helping Michael and I and like just very interested in what we were doing with our hair care brand. And we had just gotten back from London. And so he was like, hey, let's have a call. I'd love to catch up and hear what's going on. And I was like, oh boy, like, because it was kind of a bittersweet experience of having to put it on the shelf. So we got on the call and I was talking to him and I was like, hey, I actually want to do this. I want to start a sexual wellness brand. And I had already had trademarked the name Head South from years prior. It was an idea that Michael had for a sunscreen brand, like a sun care brand. And that name stuck with him from the 70s because it was a denim brand in South Africa. And so he had told me about this. When we both left Hairstory, Michael had all of these ideas. So I worked with my trademark lawyer and trademarked all of his ideas for him. And so I had already had it registered and ready to go. And so after I spoke to my friend Ian, and he was kind of like, I think it's a great idea. You can like go for it or like look into it. And so then I went downstairs and told my dad that this is what I wanted to do. And then immediately called my lawyer and said, hey, I called Michael and asked him for permission. Like, can I use this name too? I forgot there was like a little check-in with Michael because of this idea. And so he was like, absolutely, that's a great name and a great connection to sexual wellness. So then I called my lawyer and she expanded the coverage. So we had it under, skincare, sun care. And so we filed to expand what would be covered under Head South and converted it to my ownership. And that's how the name and the company came about. But to answer your question, I knew nothing. I naively assumed that I could easily work with the same manufacturers that I had been working with for years in hair care and people and relationships I developed over that time. And it actually didn't convert. It was nice to like speak to people and learn. And I had a lot of learning around the FDA and the development of these products. And along the way, I've met some incredibly talented people in supply chain, manufacturing. And the woman that I work with, I met her at a party, an event in LA. And we just both of us were from the East Coast. Both of us shouldn't have been at that party. It just so happened we both ended up being there. We were kind of like the odd ducks out because everyone else was founders of beauty brands. I was there representing Michael and Hairstory. And she was there because she had been working on a project with someone who was hosting, but neither of us were like, we didn't fit the criteria of this event. So then we kind of met each other and it kind of made sense and really worked out. And so she has been helping me and we went on a wild goose chase to find the right manufacturer. And my manufacturers are based in Los Angeles. I truly appreciate them and they have been so wonderful in educating me on things. And they've been in the industry for 30 to 40 years and been doing specifically like sexual wellness, intimate products. So They're very trusted, and I felt very much like a mentorship with the founder. And he's been very incredible in answering questions and pointing me in the right direction and making connections to other people within the industry. So it's definitely been a learning. I do have to say as well, it's so warm, the industry. It's not as competitive, at least in my experience of the people I've met along the way, and other founders and people who, sex workers, people who develop products, people who, the gamut and spectrum of people within this industry have all been so warm and so generous with their information and generous with connecting. So there's not a lot of gatekeeping. And I feel very strongly and passionate about sex education and sexual wellness products. And it's so wonderful to enter into the industry and like meet people and everyone. Like I went to a convention, like first sex convention last year, and everyone's just so wonderful.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
You realize it does. I mean, what's interesting is there's kind of this American myth of, right, like the bootstraps and the founder and the one person doing everything. But when you work for a company or you build a company, what you quickly realize is it takes a village.
Absolutely. And I've been very lucky in being able to connect with and work with people from hair care in my time working in that industry. And then also those people pointing me in the direction and connecting me to other people who might be more suited to this industry and working within sexual wellness or body care, both in manufacturing, in packaging, in PR and branding. All of it has come together in a very organic way and a very enthusiastic way, which I also love, is that there's such an enthusiasm and support for Head South from everyone that I've connected with. I'm very appreciative of that. So yeah, it's totally a village. It's a team effort. I work on everything and every bit of it. It's definitely a learning to be a founder and have that title, and to also not have a co-founder. But I feel really, really grateful to have the team that I work with very closely, as well as the extended team of people, as well as the mentors I have. Like I said, the founder of my lab has become a mentor and like calls me and checks in and emails me and connects me to other people and like sees things and sends me like, hey, I saw this and thought of you guys and what you're doing. And I have that across the board with a lot of different people in different parts of business. So like a marketing advisor, as well as a supply chain advisor, PR. And so I have all of these people a phone call away who have been so supportive and helpful with advice and direction.
That's incredible. Mm-hmm. It's good to have people you trust.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I guess I'd be curious to hear more about the product since we've been talking about the backstory.
Yeah.
What are you producing? What are you offering? And, kind of tell us a little bit more about what sets Head South's formulas apart from other brands.
Yeah. So I am producing intimacy serums. So there's 2 intimacy serums. One is a water-based and one is a silicone. They're called Slip and Slide. So slip serum, slide serum, and then we've developed a massage oil called Oasis oil. They can be sold as a set. I'm calling it Ménage à Trois, or you can buy individual. So depending on what you are looking for, these 3 offer that. And that's what I wanted to do, is create something that if you wanted to have more adventurous play, you would go with slide serum, which is a silicone base, which doesn't dry out over time. Like it just stays slippery. So it's great for anal sex, anal play, using different types of toys, except for silicone. So that's something that people don't know. Silicone and silicone is not compatible. And over time, it can deteriorate like very expensive silicone toys. And so you want to avoid using too much of silicone.
Good disclaimer.
Yeah. Yeah. With the slip serum, it's a product that's great for beginners. It's something that everyone can use, all bodies can use. Actually, all 3 of our products are for all bodies as well. I didn't want it to be specifically for certain people or genders. I wanted to create intimacy serums and an oil for everybody, for all ages. I think a lot of times when people think of personal lubricants or intimacy products, it's to fix or resolve a problem. And so for me, I have always luckily had the experience of my partners having that available. So with condoms was always lubricants or serums and oils. I didn't know otherwise that this was not a common thing. And then after speaking with girlfriends in my 30s and learning like a lot of them have never even used it or didn't know, a lot of vulva owners experience a lot of pain during sex and don't communicate that. They experience irritation post-sex, or you could sometimes end up developing BV, yeast infections, UTIs. There's so much sensitivity within the body. And so products like lubricants and intimacy serums can help prior to it. But if you don't know, or if you believe that like that's something like a person of a certain age needs, a person of a certain gender needs because of the type of sex they're having, versus it just being readily available and not something that's like shame inducing. So that's kind of the framing of like why I wanted to create these products, but it's more of the conversation around them. It's not to fix a problem. And there could be issues that people are dealing with that this then helps resolve and reduce the friction. And that's what they're intended for. So it's just to reduce friction, to enhance people's experience with pleasure. It doesn't have to be around like, oh, I'm experiencing this or this is painful. And rather than having it like seeking it out to resolve it and fix it, I love the idea of like it just being available. It's just there. And whenever it's needed, it's usable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and also this ties into me with, the sort of foundation of Head South and the reason you started a podcast, which is like sexual education being important, because if people don't understand what kind of problems are common or things about their body, like these products might be helpful for, they don't really know to seek them out, right? Or like how to use them correctly.
Right. So a lot of people of all genders experience some form of stigma or shame around sex. And it's often they like don't know how to talk about it. They think that everyone else is having sex and it's great sex all the time. I think a lot of that comes from media and porn. I think it comes from a lack of communication around pleasure and experience. And so couples, partners, solo will think that there's something wrong. And maybe there are some underlying issues and things that you need to seek out a medical professional or therapist. But oftentimes some of this stuff is like completely resolvable and with just a little communication and talking about it and understanding that like there are products very available. And I think people are intimidated by sex shops. I think people, like I mentioned, feel like a shame around needing a product to support, like thinking like I'm not normal or this isn't okay or there's something wrong with me. And so that's what I like about it is like having these products available and talking to your partner, and you don't always have to use them. But sometimes, depending, I'm going to speak from my experience as a woman, sometimes certain times of the month, you don't produce as much natural lubrication, or some people believe saliva is lubrication. It is not. And so like spit is not a substitute, but it's a matter of then understanding like sometimes it's the medication you're on, sometimes it's stress, sometimes, and then oftentimes you can have sex and there's friction and there's irritation, and that then develops, like I mentioned, into a problem that then prevents you from having sex. Like I had gone through a period of having like yeast infections and BV when I was younger, and then feeling completely not connected to my body and feeling disassociated and then not having any desire to have sex because of that, because it was either painful or uncomfortable or I was embarrassed. And so that's the framing of it, is like exactly to your point of having a podcast where people are communicating and talking about these things, normalizing them, destigmatizing them, and then the use of the products is the practice of it.
That's great. Yeah, it's like practical application.
Mm-hmm.
So I know, like, again, education being like a big pillar of the brand, like besides the podcast, are there other ways you plan on tying education into the products and like?
Yes, absolutely. And so as we release these products, we're going to educate people about lubrication, painful sex, utilizing these products in mindful masturbation, the usage of the products with partners. And so I think as we expand and grow, we will continue to create digital downloads and have experts come on speaking about the use of products. I want to expand the line into things like rope, BDSM and kink products, toys, but always having not just an educational component, but a conversational, so relational and talking to one's partner. A lot of people aren't aware of like painful sex or erectile dysfunction. It becomes a point of shame and issue. And then like slowly if they're in a long-term relationship, there's the end of sex as they know it, or that type of sex and intimacy. And so I think those are important products to talk about, share, and inform people exist in the world. And so that's the component of education with products is really important to me. I think it's not just about selling something to use. It's like, why are we using it? Who is this for? What is the purpose? Being intentional about it.
Yeah, not gatekeeping.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I thought this was really interesting when I was reading through kind of your just overall brand mission statement,
Mm-hmm.
especially because I've heard this word before and I really feel like it needs to kind of become more a part of our like general conversations and knowledge. But listeners may or may not have heard the term erotic intelligence before. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious if you can explain what it is and why it's foundational to the mission of Head South.
Erotic intelligence comes from Esther Perel, who you introduced me to Esther Perel many years ago, and I've read her books, and we, listen to her podcast, and you and I talk about her podcast often. Erotic intelligence, I think, similar to how it's within all of us, it's something that I think people need to learn how to tune into. Some people are more intuitive to it and in touch with their erotic intelligence and explore it. I think because society at large doesn't communicate about that, even still, it's something that's a mystery. But I think I think the integration of sexual unwellness, that's the wellness component of it. And so we have emotional intelligence, and a lot of people are working through learning about that within themselves as well. And I think adding erotic intelligence, adding the understanding of your desire and what drives you and what fuels you, and knowing and understanding like part of that desire comes from a space of mystery. And so a lot of people lose sight of that, especially in long-term monogamous relationships, because we become enmeshed. And so having an understanding of where your desire comes from, what turns you on, what turns you off, not even just physically, but where also what brings you pleasure. And that could be in the bedroom and outside of the bedroom. And I think it's the intelligence part of it is learning about that of yourself. It's like a self-awareness, but then learning the ways in which you can communicate with your partner. And also knowing that like your partner isn't responsible for fulfilling that part of you fully. It's a collaborative effort, I think, with eroticism and our desire and our sexuality and connection. And so it's not their responsibility to fulfill all of those needs. I think a lot of people don't even know what all those needs are. And so that's what erotic intelligence is for me. That's my understanding of it, is like knowing and examining what it is for you, and then learning the skills and how to communicate that.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes total sense. I think also it's the same as I think we're all much more consciously aware of the idea of emotional intelligence these days, which is clearly something we all kind of have to work on because it's not always inherently built into us. And sometimes you don't learn that from your family or your friend groups. But it's incredible because emotional intelligence, I feel like, is something that just deepens relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And I think erotic intelligence is a similar thing. It's like, it's not something that we get schooled in early on. It's something you have to learn for yourself about yourself and how you communicate, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm. And it's through those interactions, whether it's long-term partnerships, whether it's casual sex, even platonic love, are things that inform your erotic intelligence. It's reflections back for you, and it gives you information and data, and then you use that to kind of hone in and then communicate. And I think that's what's really important. So that your partners and the people in your life aren't responsible. Same thing with emotional intelligence. Like no one is making you do things. You are reacting to those things. And so it's the same thing as like no one is forcing you. And I think it's interesting when people have this framing of like they feel obligated to, have their partner orgasm. That's a very common myth and a belief. And it's like, that's not your responsibility to do that. It's a collaboration when you come together and are intimate with somebody else. It's not I don't think there should be expectations like that. Climax or orgasm or.
Yeah. And it puts a lot of,
And
I
also
like
the belief that it should always be happening every time.
Mm-hmm. I like the idea of it being a collaborative experience, having sex, because that's what it is. And I think we put a lot of pressure on like one partner or another to perform a certain way. And taking that out of the equation and thinking about it as like a conversation feels like a much more mature way of approaching our sexual experiences.
Yes. Yeah. I think if you frame it exactly that way of like, It's not a performance and it's not a duty. It's a collaboration. And sometimes when you're collaborating, when you're in conversation, one person's telling more of the story than the other. One person is receiving the information over the other. And then sometimes it switches. And I think it's just a matter of making sure that both parties are happy and okay or content with the experience. And it doesn't always have to be 50-50 equal, like we both got orgasm at the same time. There's all of these things that people believe need to happen around sex. And then either they drop into a place of shame or they drop into a place of dissatisfaction, frustration. And I think it's about deconstructing those beliefs, unwinding those thoughts around everything, including intimacy, and exploring with your partner. And I think it comes from talking and doing, having the conversation before, during, and after, and being aware of what actually feels good versus like, I think sometimes that can happen too, is like a partner's doing something because they've seen it or this is what they've done with their other partners and it's not working for you. But then you're like, do I say something? Do I not say something? Do I just pretend this feels good? And I think it's a disservice to yourself and your partner. And so encouraging people to talk about it and don't take it personal either. Like if you're on the receiving end of that feedback of like, hey, I don't actually like that, or that doesn't feel so good, or can you try this? That's another great way. Like, can you try this? Or I always love, there's a comedian and her clip is going around where she's talking about like, why is it when she's about to climax and she'll tell the partner like, I'm going to come, the person completely changes up tempo or does something completely crazy or gets really intense or like wild. And she's like, the thing that was working, the thing that was like getting me there was the thing you were just doing. Like, don't just stay there.
Like, don't reinvent the wheel.
Don't reinvent the wheel. This is working. And then as soon as like her partner hears like, I'm about to come or I'm almost there, they like go nuts. Like all of a sudden everything gets super, like they turn up the volume and she's like, no one said turn up the volume. But yeah, so I think for me, the podcast, this product line, and then the conversation, the continuing conversations, the education that follows is what is Head South. It's the people. So it's, podcast, products, people.
I love that. It's like a much more diverse way of approaching a product than just saying, here's a thing you should buy and kind of leaving it at that. And
Right.
I think that really helps, especially in this category where, if you've grown up in America and probably lots of other places, the conversation around sexual education is pretty much non-existent. And so like offering that as those like tools and resources for people, I think makes your product line much more just deep and substantial.
Yeah. I mean, you would understand this, and it's not to always keep going back to hair care, but I'm always going to go back to hair care. But like, and especially our experience with it is like the deconstruction of, it's not necessarily because you have fine hair or limp hair, right? Or curly, unruly hair. A lot of what marketing has done with certain products is to convince you that there's something wrong and that this is the miracle that's going to fix it. While I think there are benefits to reducing friction, I don't want Head South to be products because there's something wrong. I would rather focus on using these products to enhance an experience.
I love that. That's a great mission statement.
Yeah. And then the benefits that follow can help in those realms of like whatever it is that you're seeking or whatever issues maybe that these products can possibly resolve are the effect. They're not the reason you're like, you have to use these products, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So thinking big picture, like where do you see Head South going as a brand? And like, are there ways you'd like to see it grow and expand?
Yeah. My initial strategy is a direct to consumer, so online through our website, as well as working with boutique retailers. So there's so many incredible boutique sex shops. And so to me, that's an important starting point. It's something also that like, I want to have a relationship with the people that are selling my products. So I want to, be a consumer of those brick and mortar stores or even online, because some sex shops are just strictly online. But working with them, I think a lot of them are doing amazing, incredible things on a local level, especially within charitable organizations working with LGBTQ youth educational programs. And so seeing a lot of what activations that these smaller shops are doing is something that inspires me. And it's partnerships that I would want to work with. With every podcast episode, I ask the guests to select organizations, nonprofits that are inspiring to them, that we kind of encourage our listeners to support. And so this year, I've decided to have one for Head South, like a nonprofit that we will always kind of support and put proceeds towards. And so this year, I selected a program called the Youth Sexpert Program. They educate peer-to-peer. It's a brand new program. A young woman named Tara, who I'm going to be interviewing as well. And so she has created this. She's a sex educator, and she's created this program where she educates teenagers 15 to 19 with their parents' consent to be kind of peer-to-peer educators. And that just spoke to me so much because that's what I did when I was 16 and 17. I was educating myself, trying to find all of the resources I could. This is before like Google. And so I was going to the library, going to Walden Books and Barnes and Noble and reading magazines, reading books, and compiling information for my friends and I around pleasure. This was like 20 years ago. But then when I heard about this program, it really resonated with who I was and how I started. And I would have given anything to have had that program when I was a kid. And so that's something that I feel very passionate about in growing and expanding Head South, is through a network of people like who are doing and making a difference, making impactful programming to support people in marginalized communities, people who don't get the resources that they need around sex education. Someone once had asked me, do you think it's a bad idea that your company's called Head South? Like specifically with the South being so strict, or there's all these issues down South in the United States around sex and education, sex education. And I was like, actually, no, that's exactly where we need to be. Like, I don't find that to be a negative. I don't look at Head South as a map. That's not where the term comes from. It's from the physical body and heading south. But if people hear that phrase and think, oh, head south, like south, the South isn't good. That's very like Northeast coastal thinking. And I was like, no, actually, that's the places Head South needs to be. That's where we need to be supporting and offering education, offering support to people. Something that's really I'm very passionate about is relational wellness. So it doesn't have to be you experiencing, for example, erectile dysfunction, but maybe your partner is experiencing it. And so what resources can we provide as a support system? Maybe a relative is coming out and going through that process. And so not everybody has this journey that's easy when they are coming out. And so sometimes it takes a while, or based on their career, they might not make certain decisions. And so how can we educate people from a relational standpoint? How can you support your brother, your cousin, your best friend through those processes, through those transitions? And the same thing of like postpartum. I might never have children. I might never go through a postpartum experience, but I want to understand for my friends who have given birth, and for my family and my sisters who have given birth and gone through these experiences, and how they connect to their body and how I can support them and listen in a way that feels supportive. So that's something that's really important. So to me, that's how Head South expands. Is it's conversational, it's communication, it's connecting with people. In terms of scale, I think it's just a natural, organic build of people using the products, people engaging with us, and allowing things to happen naturally. So I don't have a forced business model of like, then I want to get into this, I want to be at Sephora. Like those are wonderful things. But I believe in those things happening when it's the right time and the right place with the right people and partners. And for me, making an impact, it doesn't have to be scalable. It has to be important for the people that are using and working with us.
Yeah, I think we always talked about this at Hairstory being more of like slow burn than like a flash in the pan.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's easier to manage too if you're approaching growth from like a slow and steady mindset as opposed to like a blow up overnight. Because one of the things I feel like I hear a lot from listening to podcasts about founder stories or having worked with founders is like, oh, well, we went viral, but that wasn't exactly a good thing because you can't, the quality control goes out the window on some level, and you kind of can't maintain your status of like delivering products in a certain way because you just haven't grown to that level yet, and it's happening overnight.
Mm-hmm. I think that happens when products go viral. I think it happens when a brand raises funds and then they have to like burn through that cash versus like being very mindful of where we're spending money or how, those those resources are being used. Like I will be raising more funds in the future for my brand, but with intention and with a purpose. I don't think throwing money out the window. I've had many conversations with people about this, of like this process of burning through cash and hiring and firing people. It's like something that's very important to me is culture of a company and how like a brand functions within the internal aspect of it. And I think that raising funds is important to expand and grow, but within a sustainable way, in a responsible way as well. I think it's irresponsible to like raise so much money and not actually I have a clear vision. I don't have this very strategic mapped out plan. I am open to what opportunities come along, and I don't believe that it's something that anyone can coordinate. I know this for a fact, and we can speak about that, of like our experience at Hairstory, and the best press came from random conversations in random places. And then those things, that press story became huge sales, which no one would have predicted. You can't actually plan that stuff out. There's something that's inauthentic around coordinating so much that it loses its authenticity. It loses its vibrancy. It loses its actual reason for being, I think. To me, I have this approach of, I have a vision. I'm open to that happening. I would love for certain things to happen, especially in terms of education for me, and like where things go and how we create a product that supports people. And I am open to the idea of working with partnerships, working with retailers who have that same understanding, working with investors who have a similar mindset of, this isn't something that I just want to flip. I'm not here to flip a business and outgrow it and burn through it and hurt people and hurt myself. I'm very cautious of that.
Yeah, I think it can be a recipe for burnout and a lot of other things.
Yeah. Like it's not to say that sales and that information, that data, that's not important, and those things aren't important. It is to have a brand function and work. But I think for me, it lies within the people, internally, externally, how people connect with your brand, how they connect with you. To me, the power of word of mouth and the power of connecting and impacting someone's life and having people who really believe in your product is more powerful than buying ads on Instagram and having people look at your website and maybe buy it. Or I don't know. I just think that when someone really truly believes in the product or believes in what you're doing is more powerful than any number of like hundreds and hundreds of viral people buying a product and then not actually believing in the product itself.
Or trying it once and not really loving it because they wasn't what they expected.
Yeah, it has to be efficacious. And that, just quickly to go back to the products themselves, for me, it was about developing things that were simplified. And so I simplified the ingredients. I wanted this first initial launch of these 3 products to be the most purest, efficacious form. So I'm not a fan of using terms like green or eco or clean. I think because everyone has a different definition and there's a lot of usage of these things or trends with these things, and then they actually don't pan out. And I think it's more important to have, especially a product that is so intimate, something that's efficacious. And sometimes organic isn't the right option for certain products. Sometimes having certain ingredients in the product to preserve it is very important. The stability of a product, all of those things are in consideration when we were creating this line. But I didn't want added fragrance, added flavors. So really distilling it down to what I would use on my own body versus like trying to meet Sephora standards or any other brand. Like a lot of these companies have certain standards to have a label or have a certification. And so with this, for me, it was, what would I use on my body? And I looked up every ingredient on the EWG, and it was about distilling it down to where I felt comfortable and where the product was really effective and simple. So not having so much additives in it. And there's room for that down the road. Speaking to your question about growth, it's like, yeah, you can expand and do like limited edition watermelon flavor. with Harry Styles, if anybody knows Harry Styles.
Goals.
That would be great. I would love to do, collaborative.
So Harry, if you're listening.
Yeah. You can email me. But doing collaborations, adding flavors, adding products in the line that are for specific purpose, cooling, heating, delaying, advancing, whatever those products are, they are in the cloud of concept for me. But for this initial launch, I wanted as simplified as possible, as user-friendly as possible. I didn't want anything that was going to stain sheets or, create issues. And then the other thing, which we didn't talk about, was these products are refillable. And so I wanted to put into the world something that offered sustainability as being sexy. It's a concept. It's not the final iteration of what I would envision to be the perfect packaging, but the concept of refilling and reducing the waste of glass. Because for me, the packaging itself is like having a product on your nightstand that looks more like beauty and skincare, that we're not hiding and stashing away in our, bedside drawers, or like, oh, your mother-in-law's coming, you got to hide it. What I love about our packaging is like, it's beautiful, it's striking, and it looks like all of your other skincare. But then that packaging is filled using tubes with the product in it. So you refill over time. So you keep that glass, because to me, it always made me sad with working within beauty. What do they call them? The empties. And like people showing pictures of like empty, beautiful glass containers. And I was like, okay, that's great. You used it all the way to the last drop, but now that's going to be recycled. Hopefully, maybe not.
Maybe.
And so the idea here was to keep that glass, because to me, it was a shame that we're like throwing out so much glass, or, recycling so much glass, and to use these tubes that are plastic currently. And there are barriers financially as well as supply chain that wouldn't allow for me to put it in a preferred material. So that to me is also how we would grow, and how I would use money should I raise more funds, is to upgrade the packaging. And so this was more about releasing products for the concept and getting people to get into the habit of refilling to reduce the waste, and then continue that. And I just read a really great article that Megan McIntyre, who's someone we know through Hairstory days, she had written for Beauty Independent about, refillability and how impactful it is, and the considerations that maybe a lot of people, consumers, don't even recognize, of like sometimes refillability or sustainable packaging isn't the right choice for that type of product. And so I made certain decisions about our packaging and this concept based on a lot of different factors. And it was very mindful and intentional. And sometimes it was limitations or barriers that wouldn't allow us to kind of create something that was my full vision. And so that's something that is very much top of mind for me, is like, how do I continue this, grow this, so that I can create the full vision of what I have in mind for the packaging, for being responsible. So not necessarily being sustainable. Sustainability is so important, but how can I be responsible?
Yeah, I think that's a great attitude. Mm-hmm. On that topic, like, obviously the whole experience of starting a company is a learning curve, right? Mm-hmm. And, there's certain choices you have to make, especially coming in without like a ton of backing and money in your pocket. I'm curious, can you tell us, what has your experience becoming a founder been like so far? And are there any big surprises or things you didn't expect?
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure a lot.
So much. Yeah. I mean, it's something where I have had the opportunity of working closely with someone like Michael, who's an innovator and has created multiple brands that are impactful, and was an incredible founder to learn from. And I've met a lot of other founders and worked with a lot of incredible people along the way. I had no idea. I honestly could tell you that there was never a point in my mind where I was like, I want to be a founder. I want to do this. Even so much so that like I'm working through that, like adding that layer of identity to myself, because I still don't feel that way. I'm working through that in owning that part of myself and allowing that part of myself to be expressed. So just that alone, just the title is something I'm working through. But in terms of actually being that and interacting with that, I think for me, a lot of learnings have been knowing people and working with them and knowing who to trust or feeling good within that, but also trusting my own instincts, learning how to trust my gut when it comes to making certain decisions. And so being very mindful of being open to people's insight, open to people's advice, but also checking in with myself and having a very strong sense of what this brand means to me and what we're set out here to do. That's something I've learned along the way of like always checking in and making sure, like, check the temperature of where you're at and see where it might have changed and maybe where you need to evolve your mission and evolve your definition of what you're doing, but also seeing where maybe you've gone wayward or where things are going off. I've learned it'll be 2 years in November since the dream happened to now. And I would say that I've learned how to roll with the punches. I've learned how to regulate my emotions around being a founder and, allowing things to just happen. So in terms of having this role and taking this on and creating this, I've had so much personal growth in the process. I think learning who to work with and also knowing that too, if sometimes you're like, okay, I definitely know I'm not going to be working with these people again, or these aren't the right partners in this. And so that's something I've been working through as well. Learning how to be very clear in my communication and also listening to people and allowing people the opportunity to speak up and share their feedback, insights, and then taking that information and using it where I feel it's best utilized. Or sometimes I'm like, I don't agree. Like, that's not what it is. And I think that reinforces what this all means for me, where this is all coming from. In terms of, I love doing the podcast, especially because it's been such a great creative outlet. And I'm working with a lot of people that you've also worked with through Hairstory. One of my favorite things, and I think you know this of me, is creating a system. So seeing how creatives function and then creating a system and creating a workflow that works for everybody involved. And so that has, bizarrely enough, that's one of my favorite things to do. And so that journey of developing how I reach out to guests, like what process and protocols happen and the timing of everything, and then working with my team on that has been one of my favorite things. And the same thing of developing the product, going through the packaging process, witnessing from like a scribble on a napkin, literally showing Ella what I was thinking, and then working and talking to different people and getting their support and advice on the branding, on the logo, on the colors. All of that process has been incredible and so much fun. And it's so crazy too, because like I said, it's been 2 years, and thinking back to the original design, the original concept, it's so different. It's a very different brand. Even the way that the logo looked, that has evolved and changed over time. And so I think my biggest advice for anyone is to be open to the change. So whatever you thought was your first idea or whatever you believed was it's not often it. And I love that about collaboration, is that it becomes something else. And that can go for a product line and that can go for sex. So what you thought felt good with one person or what you thought sex should look like, if you're open to having the conversation and making it more collaborative and explorative, and also being okay with like, some of this isn't for me and this doesn't work, and playing with that offers an opportunity to discover things that you might not have ever discovered, both as a founder, as someone having sex, being a partner with somebody. That's, to me, the key advice is just an openness to exploring.
Yeah, it seems like it requires so much flexibility, so much trusting your guts and instincts, which I think also is probably a lot more difficult for women than it is for men, going in this idea of being confident and like sharing your opinion. And, we're just not trained the same way men are to just be vocal about this stuff and be confident in the ways of business, I guess, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think for me, there's a lot of things I'm not confident in, and knowing that there's someone on this planet that exists to hold that role or hold that information. But empowering myself with the skill sets I have, as well as learning and being privy to the things that maybe I have felt intimidated by in business. So speaking specifically in business, there's things that like intimidate me or that I feel insecure about, and working with people and having them advise me or educate me, I feel more empowered. And so I don't have to be the expert in the room. I just know that in the room, there are other experts here supporting me, and that feels amazing.
That's great. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's that learning how to build the right team too, right? Which I think you're very good at is learning how to manage people and work with people, bring out the best in people, and find the people who you really have faith in and can rely on.
Yeah. I mean, we could make this whole episode of fangirls of Michael Gordon, but like I learned very early on working with Michael and I will use you as an example, because when I came in, you had a certain role, which wasn't very clear. It was very vague. It was kind of like, whoa, this is a weird way to function and have a business. But in learning from that, it was like, oh, it offers people the opportunity to find themselves. Or as Michael used to always say, we can move people around on the bus. Like, I just want people on the bus. And so
you can swap seats on the bus.
You can swap seats on the bus. You can change the role. And it then affords the opportunity of someone who, like, a lot of us at Hairstory weren't people that like, oh, I want to become a web designer and I'm going to study this thing and have like this very clear path. There's so many people on the planet that have that, like they've gone through and worked in a way that was very clear, very linear. But for a lot of us, there isn't that. It's as expansive. So it expands in and out. And so that's someone like myself who is, I'm going to explore these things. I didn't even know this was in me. And I've discovered this in myself. And so that's kind of the approach I take with building a team. It's what we learned at Hairstory through Michael and working with him, is that like everyone has a seat on the bus and we are allowed to give people the opportunity to try something out or follow somebody, shadow someone, take something on. And then it's completely okay if it's like, that's not the role for you. And let's find something else for you. That's not the place for you, or this doesn't speak to you, or this doesn't bring you joy or spark something within you. Then let's kind of move you over here, or let's kind of feed what is sparking for you. And maybe sometimes you do have to do some of the admin work or the boring stuff, but along the way, it's important to kind of have whatever is like feeding and fueling you. And so that's what I appreciated learning and doing and having a work experience that was like that, because it set the tone for how I like to work and function for myself as well as my team.
Yeah, and that's very definitely not a traditional approach to how workplaces operate. What's interesting, I think, about working for startups, and one of the things I love about it is you wear a lot of hats, but if you enjoy wearing a lot of hats, you learn a lot about what does appeal to you and what doesn't. And I also think it's to your benefit as a founder, as a manager, to be flexible and like listen to where people feel most comfortable and most confident, because you'll bring the best out of your employees that way. And I also think when it comes to having a startup, there is so much changing so quickly that having these rigid roles set in place and these titles doesn't work in the long term. And you do yourself a disservice to like assume somebody only fits into this one category and like to not understand what all of their strengths and weaknesses are,
Yeah, I think exactly, like the rigidity of it, especially with creatives, is really hard, and like formats and time. And I remember having the opportunity to, I worked 3 days a week at Hairstory. Like I would come into the office 3 days a week. The other 2 days I'd work from home because I needed space. Like my brain had to shift from one role, which was like working and managing teams and checking in with everybody and creating a system around how you need approvals and process and protocol for the work that you were doing, versus Paul, who was our videographer, and like being the bridge for some form of system so that people like Michael or Alexander, who were the creative directors, having that process along the way, like an approval process, a process to move projects along. So it wasn't just like a free for all, but on the days that I work from home, it would allow me and afford me the ability to be my own, like express my own creativity. So I'd work on the website, I'd work on certain things, but I needed kind of the space and the alone time away from the group to do that. And so having a company that allowed that and we had a later start time because the majority of people had a hard time getting to work at 9 a.m. Like we weren't all 9 to 5s. We had kind of a system that allowed people to arrive at 10. Sometimes I remember Paul, there was a period where he was working on certain things and he would prefer to work overnight. Some videographers, certain creatives love to work at night. And so, affording people that ability to work on their own timeline is so important. I think especially for creatives, because it's really hard when you try to sit down and be creative and you're like, this is not the time. Like if I was doing this myself, if I was painting or expressing some type of creativity, this is not the hour that I would be doing it. So I think trying to fit people into a 9 to 5 mold is like an incorrect way to create productivity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now that we've gotten very far off the topic.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's how good conversations roll.
Mm-hmm.
I think my last question for you was, shameless plug. Where can people purchase Head South products?
Yes. So we will be launching online on October 24th. It's a Tuesday. We're also going to be hosting, if you're in New York, a trunk show so you can come see the product in person. That's happening the weekend before, and that's October 22nd in Chinatown. The information will be on our Instagram. So if you're in town on Sunday, we're hosting a little trunk show to come meet my kids, introduce my products to the world, and people can, touch them, play with them, ask questions. We can talk about compatibility with toys, talk about what's best for you. And so that's how people can find. And it's at headsouth.world.
So exciting.
Yes. So yeah, that's a wrap.
That's a wrap.
Special thanks to all of our guests. Head South is hosted by Cat Meyer, produced by Isis Barlow, edited by Megan Hook, with music by Lily Rezi Rothman, graphics by Ella Chodos Irvine, cover art by Gina Schiappacasse, and intro by Murph Meyer.
If you're looking for me, I'm heading south. All year round, I'm going down. Now you know where I'll be, I'm heading south. So come on, look me round.